and welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters. With your questers, Josh and Dan, I am Dan.
I am Josh.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things fractal, as we are going to talk about the adventure from Lou Prosperi himself, Shattered Pattern. So if you have any questions for us, please drop us a line at edsgpodcast@gmail.com, or go on the official Earthdawn Facebook page and actually ask Lou your questions when he reviews this episode and as he hears it, as we talk about it. So,
and please, if you do have questions, feel free to send them in. Since our last email episode, we have not gotten any new emails.
Yeah.
There has been somebody that found our YouTube page where I've been reposting and has actually been commenting on every episode or every other episode as he's been going through them. So I got a bunch of notifications in our official Survival Guide email box that you have a new YouTube comment. The last 7 emails are from this guy who's like, oh, hey, I just found this. And he's binging through them. He's moving pretty quickly.
Welcome back.
Yes. By the time he catches up with this, it'll be a little bit, but...
Fair. So otherwise, no, sorry for the couple of weeks off. We have not pod faded, just life got in the way, and we are back now, so...
Yes. Yeah. Life and scheduling and various other things. It is that time of year.
Yeah, it is. End of school, essentially, is creeping up on everybody and all the things that have to go along with that. So, Shattered Pattern. This is not an adventure I'd ever read before, and I still haven't read it. I've skimmed it for the podcast research because I've never run it. And so I've left these things on the shelf because if I wasn't going to run them, I didn't want to spoil it ahead of time and get ahead of myself. So one of those things. You, however...
I have run this one.
Aha.
I do like it. This is probably not my top adventure. I think I've talked about what my favorites are, but this is definitely a solid one.
3? Yeah.
It stands alone on its own just fine.
Mm-hmm.
It does a little bit have a connection to...
Infected,
yes. I was going to say, because Infected, if you recall from that episode, one of the things that is found at the end is a statue of a dragon that is sort of intended to not remain in the player character's hands.
Yes.
It is that item that ultimately leads to the setup for this adventure, which is that a high circle nethermancer gets a hold of that dragon statue, which it turns out is a pattern item of the Great Dragon Icewing.
Yes.
Again, sort of demonstrating the fact that pattern items, as they are presented in that capacity, are really intended more as MacGuffins and things that drive plots and conflicts, rather than something that you get as a reward to permanently boost your magical prowess. That's what thread items are for. That's what group patterns are for. That's not really what pattern items are for. They're kind of a concept in magic theory that allows you to kind of bend, if not outright break, some of the rules of magic.
Mm-hmm.
Most pattern items aren't worth anything because they're not connected to anything worth having influence over.
Yeah.
But pattern items of significant and important people, like, say, King Varulus III of Thrall, or the Great Dragon Icewing, or Bloodwood, or something along those lines, these are important not because of the pattern item itself necessarily, but because of the influence that it allows you to have over the connected thing. And in this case, the pattern item isn't even used to directly affect and influence Icewing. It is just used because of that connection allows the Nethermancer to gain knowledge that allows him to kind of take action against Icewing. The reason that he is doing this, of course, is that he is the head of a faction of the Cult of the Great Hunter.
Yes.
Which we talked about in an earlier episode where we were going through the various secret societies.
Episode 124, I looked it up.
Thank you.
Cult of the Great Hunter, episode 124 of this here podcast.
And so the player characters are brought into this not really knowing or understanding what's going on. They are kind of hired by this individual and they are hired because of their reputation for having done other stuff before, the person who hires them is like, I woke up, I don't know who I am or what happened to me. All I have are these things. I can't really promise you much of anything, except these things indicate that there are probably some resources that I have access to at some point if I could remember what they were. Can you help me out? That's the setup. Again, like, you meet a guy in a bar, in a tavern, who hires you to do this job.
But it's a different kind of hire than you're used to.
Yeah.
It's a whole lot more mystery going on here.
Sure. There is quite a significant bit of mystery, and that is partly the hooks for the player characters in this are hopefully the fact that, one, your heroes and somebody who has clearly undergone some kind of traumatic event of some sort is asking you for help. And you are presumably heroes and good guys and will want to help them just out of general altruism. And not just because, oh, I promise you, whatever. But also the very mystery of who he is and why he can't remember what has happened to him, and the clues that he does have, and the clues that the player characters maybe can uncover early on can be very intriguing to certain types of individuals.
Yeah. So let's back this up real quick. This is actually meant for 6 to 8 players, because most of the original first edition adventures written for 6 to 8 players, of 5th to 7th circle. This is some major interaction going on and some heavy lifting as far as what you're going to be doing, because if you're looking for 8 players maximum at 7th circle maximum, whoo boy, there's some points here. This is some big stuff.
There is some opposition in this that can be very difficult.
Daunting.
Yeah, daunting in some capacities. And we'll talk about those when we get to them.
Absolutely. So this was, yeah.
Yeah, and this is also sort of a non-linear adventure.
Yes.
What ends up happening, and I haven't reread it recently, and maybe in your skimming you can recall specifically.
Fair.
I think one of the items that the person who hires the group has is a map marking some locations out in the wilderness.
Rings a bell.
Yes. The individual has 3 things that he has with him. It is written as if the group meets him in Kratos.
Yes.
That does not have to be the place that it starts. It's kind of like anywhere that he could be, that the group could be contacted to come and meet with him.
Yeah. And this was written before the Kratos source book, so it was one of those.
Oh yeah, Kratos
wasn't well fleshed out at that point, so any city will do just fine.
They basically get approached and hired by this elf who basically says, I don't know who I am. I can't remember my name. I don't know who I am or where I came from or what has happened to me to lead me to this way. This is all that I remember. 3 weeks ago is like the earliest memory that I have, where they found me at the edge of the city. This boy brought me in and they were kind of taking care of me. And these things that I have give me some reason to believe that whatever has happened to me is pretty significant in some way. And I want you to help me find out what's going on. And he presents them with 3 items, 3 MacGuffins, essentially. There's an amulet. There are 2 coins. They're not like standard regular silver gold pieces or anything. They're like 2 strange coins and a map. The map has 3 locations marked out on it. And the adventure is generally written with the idea that what will probably happen based on where they are, the group is going to visit them in a particular order. But they don't have to. They can go to whichever one they want first.
Yeah.
But likely because of where they're traveling, they will probably go to the one that's closest to them first, and then the next
sense.
Closest, and so forth. Because that kind of makes sense.
So it helps that they're in Kratos, but you can do something close to where you want them to start first. So the Game Master can kind of rearrange where they are.
It is perfectly fine to sort of rearrange and place the start of this in Thrall or in Travar or anywhere else that the group may be that is like a sizable enough population center that somebody likely would have found this individual and taken them in and kind of helped care for them over the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, because you really won't get to the penultimate act until you figure out all of the clues.
Right. Because now there's really one other clue that can be found, and that is that if somebody astrally examines the elf in question, there's something weird going on with his pattern that at the time the person observing isn't really able to understand. It's not like anything that he has seen before. That they will have seen before.
Yeah, they have no frame of reference on what's happening astrally to this person.
It is apparently a very, very complex pattern that gives indications of like probably powerful adept magic or something along those lines. But it also looks like the pattern, like if you think of a pattern as like this elaborate tracery of lines and whirls and knots and designs, kind of like some kind of elaborate
London Underground map.
Yeah. And if somebody then took an egg beater and like went brrr and like tangled it all over the place.
Yeah.
That kind of provides some insight as to why he may not be able to remember anything. It's because his pattern has been messed with on a kind of fundamental level, and that's affecting his ability to remember or get in touch with the magic that clearly lies within him or anything like that. But other than that, it's like, this is really weird. Yeah, somebody messed with you. We've got these mysterious things. Okay.
Undertake this.
We're going to undertake this.
Exactly. So, like I said, it begins in Kratos as it's written. You can kind of move it if you want to a little bit, especially since Kratos has not been fleshed out. But basically, it happens on the border between the Badlands and the Servos jungles where you really kind of want to get started. Somewhere in there.
Yeah,
and as you
it's
said,
in that kind of House Katention territory along the southern Servos jungle, near Travar, near the Badlands. Like there were 3 different locations that are all in this kind of semi-wilderness area. These are all like ruins and whatnot. And it's possible that people could do research or make knowledge tests to have a better idea of what they might be encountering when they get there. And we talked about this a while ago with Infected. I had thought when we talked about that one that was like the only adventure that actually used Shantai's sextant to place anything. This adventure actually does as well.
There you go. So we have 2.
Yeah.
And we'll take them.
It sort of, again, presents the idea that you are going to be going to them in a particular order, but it still allows you to place them on the greater Barsave map that came in the Barsave box set so that they could, theoretically visit them in whatever order they wanted.
Exactly. And because this is, like you said, non-linear, it's not like the clues they find in location 1 are dependent upon the clues they would find in location 2.
Right.
So they can do them out of order until they get all the pieces together. And then there's a final place to go to that should be the last place they go to that's not actually on the map. Unless I have that wrong.
Yeah, sort of.
Sort of.
I think if the group visits the locations out of order, they may be lacking important context or information about what is going on.
Fair.
And it could be that they deal with the threat before they exactly understand everything that's going on with that.
Which would be bad.
Which could be bad. But generally speaking, again, it's sort of structured under the idea, well, it would make the most sense for them to go to the place that's closest first.
Agreed.
And so then get the information there and then gradually kind of work up. But that's not something that's necessarily required. It's not open-ended the way that, say, Infected was, or that Dead Man's Hand, again, the other Robin Laws adventure that we've talked about so far, where it's kind of and here's the situation, and here are the different ways you can deal with it.
Exactly.
This isn't linear, but it's also not truly open-ended in the same way.
Agreed.
It's a good story and an interesting mystery to investigate and a sort of dangerous trek. There's a little bit of overland travel stuff. Hey, you can spice this up with other encounters if you want to. We're not going to get into those. You know what your group can handle. You deal with those if you want to spice things up. And if you don't want to, that's fine. You can just kind of skip to the thing.
Well, yeah. And we did a whole bunch of podcasts on how to travel overland and how to prepare for those and how to do the Kaer crawls and how to prepare for those. And so all of those podcast setups lead right into Shattered Pattern because, as you said, there's basically 5 parts to the whole thing. While you're in Kratos, you meet and examine the elf and his accoutrements and the clues. Then you travel over the land. This is in between all of these. It doesn't really count as a part. So it's like 1A, you travel. And then, which is used often from place to place. River travel. Wow, say that 5 times fast. Overland travel. And then you have your encounters. Maybe you come across the Thrall army. There's some other NPCs in there. Things like that. So that's always going to be part 1A. So you can have 2, which is you go to the temple. And that's kind of a Kaer crawl. There's rooms, there's a bone spirit, there's traps, there's snakes, and there's cultists. And then you go to 1A again, travel again. Then you go to the Lost Kaer, which is the Kaer of Varenna. And again, another Kaer crawl. Same kind of thing. And then you go back to 1A, travel again. And then you go back to the lair. Because we have a temple, we have a Kaer, and a lair. So then you go to the lair. And again, more of a Kaer crawl. More NPCs, more traps, and more so forth and so on. And then you have 1A again, travel. Then you get to the finale. So there's really 5 parts with travel in between all 5. So you could stretch this out if you want to make this a really long campaign.
And the finale is really just like, hey, here are a couple of different ways that the end of this, like that the climax of this adventure might play out.
Yeah.
So let's kind of talk about one of the things that it's sort of recommended that you run into in the course of your travels at some point is to meet a detachment of the Throllic army, because they could come in handy as allies later on. Mm-hmm. I forget exactly what they're doing out there, but they're basically like a group that is out there. Mm-hmm. Their goals and objectives kind of align with the player characters for different reasons.
Let's just say they're running maneuvers. Why not? That's what armies do.
Well, they're running maneuvers. They're investigating reports of the cult of the Great Hunter acting in the area and are trying to track those down and so forth. And there's nothing at first that the player characters may necessarily connect that what they're doing is actually connected to what the dwarfs are investigating. But yes, they are ultimately all kind of tied into the same end.
Yes, agreed. So we can break down the plot a little bit more finely now. Since we've got the major events, travel, temple, travel, Kaer, travel, lair, whatever order you want to do them in. Whole lot of traveling, whole lot of things to go along with on that one. So
before we hit the locations, let's backtrack again. I kind of talked a little bit about some of the setup here, but let's get into a little bit more specifics on this. And we're going to now be getting into more like concrete spoilers.
Yeah, so if this is enough to whet your appetite, keep listening. If you're the player, maybe stop now. And give the episode to your game master and say, run this!
The High Circle Nethermancer goes by the name of Tyrlaan. Mm-hmm. He was the one that got a hold of the dragon statue and studied it, and from his study of it, learned the location of some of the dragon eggs that were in Icewing's care.
Clutch, yeah.
The dragons lay eggs, and they are given to a great dragon to sort of nurture and raise, to train the hatchlings in the proper ways of dragondom.
Yeah, go back to the dragon episodes for those.
Got a hold of some dragon eggs, and as a member of the cult of the Great Hunter and a worshiper of Vergegorm, is sort of trying to attract the attention or to please his mentor.
Yeah.
By basically doing this really, really nasty, warped necromantic blood ritual.
Yes.
To corrupt the dragon eggs and the hatchlings that are inside. Mm-hmm. In a similar way that Vergegorm himself supposedly has some young dragons that are all bound up in astral cocoons and are being corrupted. So it kind of plays into that whole idea.
Yeah.
The elf that hires the characters at the beginning is one of Icewing's drakes.
Yes.
That was sent out to find out what had happened to the eggs that were stolen. He got captured by Tyrlaan and had his pattern messed with.
Hence the name of the
name. There is actually a spell that Tyrlaan knows. It's a high circle like ritual spell called Shatter Pattern.
Yes.
That does exactly what it says on the label.
It is literally the last page in the book, so you build up to what that spell actually is.
Fortunately, as a drake, which means he has access to very powerful magic and has some kind of dragon lineage, it didn't kill him outright. It just basically messed with his memory and has caused some problems for him.
Yeah.
So that he no longer knows what's going on, but he has enough information on him that allows the player characters to kind of retrace his steps and find out what's going on.
Yep.
A couple of other drakes as well were investigating, and they were likewise captured and are still being held by Tyrlaan.
Sounds about right.
One of the steps involves rescuing them, getting a little bit more info into the situation. Yeah, there are a total of 3 drakes. Rathan is the one that sort of managed to escape and get to a place where he gets found and eventually hires the player characters. So that's kind of the situation, and this is the investigation and things that the player characters uncover as they're going through.
Yeah. And let's not get this wrong. Tyrlaan, is a bad mamma jamma.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's like a 12th circle nethermancer.
I don't even know, but he was researching powers of the horrors just before the Scourge, got horror marked, and sacrificed the town he was in, and he killed the horror. Okay, right there, badass. Then he moved to Varenna and entered their Kaer for the Scourge, and he was 100 years in that Kaer. He was still researching the horrors, got willingly marked again, and sacrificed Kaer Varenna again, and killed that horror. So that's 2 down for 1 nethermancer. Just saying. And then he found Vergigorm and willingly got marked by Vergigorm, thinking he would do the same thing and turn around and kill Vergigorm because he's already got 2 under his belt and he's aiming for the Great Hunter himself. And he started the cult of the Great Hunter to help Vergigorm, but he's...
Yeah, this particular branch of it, because it is not the entirety of the cult of the Great Hunter.
Agreed. So yeah, he's got plans. And so far, he's 2 for 3 taking out the horse he's intentionally got marked by.
He is old. He has a lot of knowledge. He is very powerful. He's got armored matrices in his abilities list. So he is at least above Circle 8 because you don't get access to those until Circle 9.
Yeah.
He's also made extensive use of thread magic. It turns out that the amulet, that's one of the clues at the beginning, is Tyrlaan's amulet and is a pattern item for him, and that basically without that, some of the thread bonuses that he has will not be active, which is fortunate.
Yes, because he's a bad man.
He's got a rank 4 thread to a spell matrix staff, a rank 3 thread to crystal ring armor, 3 rank 3 threads to the true patterns of the temple, the Kaer, and his lair, 2 rank 5 threads to the group pattern of the cult of the Great Hunter. He's got another thread woven to one other thing that we'll talk about later, because it's not really directly relevant to this adventure. It's just another way that his numbers get boosted.
Yeah.
The typical spells that he has in his matrices are Astral Horror, Constrict Heart, Gateway, Wither Limb, Bone Shatter, Shift Skin, Create Life, and Alter Life. Those are 2 special ritual spells.
Yep.
Allowing him to do the things that he is doing. And it's not just him on his own. There's other stuff that's going on there as well.
I would take some significant session prep just to make sure I understand everything that Tyrlaan can do, because it's a lot.
You are dealing with a warden level opponent.
Yeah.
That is going up against high journeyman, but still journeyman level characters.
And you will be going into his lair and he will be there. So I'm just saying. The Game Master prep on this one, do not take lightly. This should be a formidable task, and he should be a very hard to defeat opponent. Because, as you said, he's probably 12th circle, if not 13th. So he's up there. And he is the one who stole Icewing's pattern item, the obsidian dragon statue.
Yes, and the eggs.
And the eggs. So he got dragon eggs, killed 2 horrors, marked by Vergigorm.
Yeah, he has slain a couple of horrors. He managed to locate a place where a great dragon was protecting dragon eggs, managed to get into that spot and get out with the eggs.
Yes.
He is not to be trifled with.
No. He's up there with like Lord Vader from the Star Wars universe. He's not quite Palpatine, but he's darn close.
Yeah. He is very intelligent, very difficult. A high circle nethermancer is dangerous enough. You will be facing him in his lair, where he will have an opportunity to have had plans and preparations and stuff like that are made.
All kinds of advantage over you.
So let's kind of walk through the 3 locations. here in the sort of expected order that the group will encounter them because of where they're traveling from and where these other things are in relation to them.
Before, I want to get a nice shout out to James Higgins, who did the maps on these. These are all really well done, and I somehow, for whatever reason, never noticed that font before for all the writing. I want that font. It looks really cool. But I like all of these maps. They're very
James
well
Higgins
done.
also did
And Moody.
the splash map pages in the Parlength book.
Yes.
It's a very similar style.
It is.
They're all really good.
I like it. It's moody and well laid out. So first location, so getting past
First
Kratos.
location is the Horror Temple.
Yes.
It is a former temple to Passion that has since been sort of taken over and converted to be a temple in service of the cult of the Great Hunter worshipping Verjagor.
Yep.
Here they are mostly going to be dealing with some of the regular cultists that are part of Tyrlaan's sect.
Yes.
They'll meet the cultists, they'll get some information. Some of the clues that they uncover will indicate that the leader of the cult is an elf that may lead them to believe that perhaps the person that hired them is in fact the leader of the cult.
Yeah.
And that something happened to him to not have him realize what's going on. There are a couple of the lieutenants of the cult are here. They're 4th, 5th Circle Adepts. There are a bunch of regular cultists. There are a couple of wither snakes. Those are nasty.
Yes, they are.
There's also, in a secret room in the temple, a room where Tyrlaan has set up one of his bone circles.
Yeah.
This, in conjunction with his gateway spell, allows him actually to travel between the 3 locations relatively easily.
Yeah.
And this bone circle has a bone spirit in it, which can provide some information if the group is capable of talking to it and persuading it to reveal information.
Yeah, that bone circle's the size of a small swimming pool.
Yeah.
And it's the size of a large swimming pool. So it's nothing to be trifled with.
A ruined temple kind of exploration. You fight some low-level, relatively speaking, low-level members of the cult, gain a little bit of information, maybe have some clues as to this is what we're dealing with, but not knowing the full extent of what's going on. Possibly starting to think that the person that they are working for might be the person behind all of this, and possibly fearing, well, was he telling the truth? If they examined him astrally, they think that's probably likely, and he may not be aware of what's going on, but is there a trap or some other kind of situation that we're not sure about here?
Yeah.
Relatively straightforward, not particularly difficult, just provide some insight and initial flavor and stuff about what's going on and some clues as to the overall thing.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be easy. It's a nice little, like I said, Kaer crawl. You've got rooms to go into, traps, NPCs, bone spirit, bone circle. So you've got some investigating to do and some stuff to solve and places to go, and then get back out again is always the hard part. And then, so if that one's the first one, the second one would be the Lost Kaer of Varenna.
Right. This is the second location. If you're traveling from Kratos, this would be the second one that you come across.
Yeah.
And this is a Kaer that Tyrlaan had been in.
Mm-hmm.
He had resided in it for a while, after killing all the residents of it.
Yes.
Tyrlaan lived there.
He spent 100 years in Varenna during the Scourge, slowly doing more research and slowly killing off the inhabitants of Varenna because, Tyrlaan is evil, and that's all there is to be said about that.
This is your sort of standard type of Kaer crawl in some regards.
Yeah.
There are some traps that you need to deal with, some denizens of the Kaer. There's a Krillra, which is a big nasty creature that you can fight.
Oh yeah, love them.
And in this place, it's more just like gaining some information and finding out, here's what was going on here. The secret here is that there is a room that is sort of like a prison cell. Mm-hmm. And there is a dwarf that is imprisoned in the cell who is sort of like asking for help. Says he was working for the army of Thrall and was captured and so forth. And since they had previously met some members of the Thrallic army at the previous location that were investigating, what was going on with the cult of the Great Hunter, there's reason for them to perhaps believe the story.
Yeah.
And it is partially true, but what this dwarf Joran does not tell them, yes, he was actually captured by Tyrlaan, but he was then experimented on and has been turned into something called the Shadow Hunter, where he can appear as a regular sort of dwarf, but can also take a shadow form that can do some pretty nasty, like, surprise attacks.
Yeah.
He's got talents for mostly 7th Circle Scout. He's got Thief, Surprise Strike ability as well. He's also got a couple of Beastmaster talents and some Wizard talents. A lot of this is from Tyrlaan doing like Alter Life and messing with his pattern and basically turning him into a sort of like a horror construct.
Yeah.
So he was a 7th Circle Scout, got captured, and Tyrlaan added a whole bunch of other stuff on top of him, and he is now basically entirely enthralled to the Nethermancer, and his ultimate goal is to gain the group's confidence, maybe travel along with them, and then at an opportune moment, betray them, ambush them, and cause some problems.
Death, destruction, chaos, and havoc?
If somehow the group figures it out and deals with him beforehand, Tyrlaan can just bring him back from the dead because he's a powerful Nethermancer and can do that sort of thing. And again, Joran is just a construct at this point.
Yeah, but a 7th Circle Scout is what he started with. So
oh, yeah.
He's still significant, formidable.
He's a 7th Circle Scout with a lot of other surprises in his belt.
Yes. Not to be messed with. Well, until you have to mess with them.
Through the investigation of the Kaer, they will find some more information that provides more insight into what's going on. They will learn more about what's actually happened with Tyrlaan and what his past was like. Nothing that allows them to learn that the person that hired them yet is not Tyrlaan.
Mm-hmm.
So there's still that kind of suspicion going on there. And then there's just one more location for them to go to, that being Tyrlaan's lair itself,
yes.
Which is another sort of underground complex.
So basically three Kaer crawls in this adventure, but that's fine.
Kaer Varenna is probably the largest of them, but there's not a lot of detail about it because it's a typical Kaer, and it's more like, hey, here's what you find in these locations, and the rest of it they can kind of poke around in.
And it's an abandoned Kaer, so there's really not a whole lot to find. So you could spend significant time there if you really want to get detailed into the weeds, but you shouldn't be getting into the weeds because your clock is to try and help out Amnesia Boy and figure out what's going on with him. And so you shouldn't be spending a whole lot of time there. I can't say rush them through the Kaer, Varenna, but speed it up a little bit. It's like it's empty, abandoned, and nothing good happened here. So moving on.
Tyrlaan's lair, that location, this is where everything sort of gets revealed. They do find the obsidian statue in an earlier location.
Yeah.
And if they have encountered it previously, go, oh, this is the statue that we found in
Infected.
At Honto. Okay, this is really interesting.
Yes.
And so in Tyrlaan's lair, they find 2 more drakes, not realizing that they're drakes because they're in humanoid form.
Mm-hmm.
That are sort of in a suspended animation. Tyrlaan has not really done anything with them yet. They're just kind of locked away.
Experiments I'll get to later.
Yes. Then there is the egg room, which is the laboratory room where one of the dragon's eggs, or the dragon egg that he stole, is being bathed in this blood-soaked nethermantic cocktail that is corrupting it.
Yeah.
There are some cadaver men. There's other bubbling broth and like all sorts of nasty, like, oh yeah, this is like really creepy nethermantic. This is the stuff that gives nethermancers a bad name.
Another bone circle room. Yeah.
Yeah. Depending on how they approach this, if they are quiet and stealthy, it is possible for them to poke around a bit and learn some things before they actually need to fight anybody. But if they go in loud, things are going to be a little bit rough for them. But ultimately, they need to deal with it. They will need to deal with Joran, the Shadow Killer.
Yeah.
At some point. They will need to deal with Tyrlaan and hopefully like deal with them separately, because there are also other, there are cadaver men and other things that are in the lair here and ward traps and all sorts of other stuff that just make things.
And don't forget the pair of tainted windlings.
Oh yeah, and
fun.
a couple of windlings that have had their patterns and have been experimented on, so they're kind of nasty in terms of adding an additional difficulty to the whole affair.
Yeah.
How do we get the egg out of the broth? If like somebody actually falls into the blood broth, what happens to them? There's all sorts of like nasty environmental stuff that can go on during the course of this sort of final climactic encounter.
Yeah.
Possibly the Throlic soldiers may make a new appearance to provide some additional support to the group if it's necessary to help deal with some of the minions and other cultists and whatnot. But that's sort of generally it. And hopefully they are able to successfully deal with Tyrlaan, learn that he is not the person that hired them, learn the true nature about what's going on from the two drakes that were in suspended animation, that were sort of in hibernation or whatever.
Yeah.
Essentially gain a major favor from the Great Dragon Icewing.
Yes. And maybe possibly, totally. And perhaps coming across some other legendary items, the Blades of Kaer, which...
The Blades of Kaer, which feature very prominently in the Blades Adventure Collection.
What? No. That works out nicely.
Tyrlaan has a thread woven to one of them, which again provides some additional bonuses to his stuff, making him an even more prodigious opponent. This is a set of daggers that were held by former heroes of Kaer. There is a big story behind them that plays out in its own adventure thing that we will talk about in the future. But this is the way that the player characters, like sort of the thread through these adventures here, these standalone published adventures, kind of continues through this, where they find the blades and can then sort of like start learning about their history and get involved in Kaer, whether that is, depending on the timing, before or after its refounding.
Yeah.
You know, they will certainly be very significant figures in the present and potentially future of Kaer and dealing with all of that.
So this one is lengthy enough on its own. It could be spread out if they wanted to spend more time in each of those locations. And that would be a way to stretch it, but I don't think you have to. I think you can if you want to. If they want to spend more time, they can. Your players and your player characters certainly can do so, but really, there's enough going on here. Well done, Lou.
It's sort of recommended to do 3 sessions, like 1 session for each of the 3 locations that the group is investigating.
Yeah.
You could probably stretch it, like if you're talking about the overland travel to the first location, you could probably stretch it out to 4 without too much difficulty. And depending on how things go, you know, it's possible that it could take even longer depending on how their investigations and that sort of stuff goes.
Yeah, for my group, I'm darn certain with as much detail as they want to get into and how long combat takes, that we'd be doing 3 sessions per location, and then at least 1 or 2 sessions of travel in between. So my group alone, this would at least run me about 12 sessions, which is fine. I like spending time in this realm. That's why we host the podcast.
Yeah, it's a really solid adventure. It is very Earthdawn. There are a lot of allies and follow-ups that can sort of come out of this on their own. One, you get the favor from Icewing, can come in very handy, especially if a group is looking for information about thread items that they have, whether it's the blades that they found in this or other thread items that they might have on their person. They get the thanks of 3 drakes, which are not insignificant allies to potentially have.
Agreed.
Who may also perhaps be called upon in the future to provide assistance or favors. It involves the group in some capacity with the with the Cult of the Great Hunter. And we talked a lot about how player characters might deal with the cult in the episode about them. So go back to that for sort of further ideas and thoughts.
Yeah.
There is unique and creepy and powerful magic that becomes available that could very well serve as a MacGuffin or hook for subsequent adventures. What do the player characters do with this dark, what should probably be forbidden knowledge?
Yes.
What goes on with that? Are there others who might have heard about these that might then come after them to try and obtain these things. Imagine that the Denerastus would probably be very interested in what those spells could do, especially if you have looked at the Iopo sourcebook and the kind of stuff that they get up to in their Undercity.
Yep.
So there's a lot of stuff that could sort of be spun off of this in various capacities, all on your own. Aside from the Blades of Kaer, which have their own dedicated adventure series to them, everything else is more of like, hey, here's a bunch of stuff, do with it as you will. Yeah. And you certainly have a player character group that is coming into their own as significant actors and movers and shakers in Barsave because of the attention that they have drawn as a result of this.
Yeah.
They will even get some thanks and like recognition passed along to the Kingdom of Thrall if they haven't already been working with them extensively because of the way that they helped out the soldiers that they met. You know, there's a lot that can come out of this. It's a solid adventure. It's a really good major multi-session story. Ties into a lot of really cool Earthdawn stuff.
Yeah, that's only found in Earthdawn. Yeah. So since this was first edition, and obviously Lou is partial to first edition because he helped create it, any fourth edition updates to any stat blocks, you think? Or because really this doesn't matter on a timeline. This doesn't matter.
On a timeline, this doesn't hugely matter. The only part of it where it may matter doesn't really relate to this adventure itself.
Yeah.
But more to how, if you're going to follow it up with Blades, how that plays into whatever status of Kaer that you are working with.
Fair.
This book is written, and the Blades adventures are written on the assumption that Krathis Gron has not returned yet, and that Kaer has not been restored.
Yes.
It is a slightly different situation if that has happened. I don't think it's in Blades, but in maybe in the Kaer book, they talk about how that could play into a post-return. But yeah, essentially, like, you would want to grab newer... Like, a lot of times you can just kind of take the stat blocks as they are without too much concern. Maybe, like, compare them to the steps that your player characters are dealing with to see if they are balanced and maybe tweak them appropriately. You would probably want to take a look at the talents that Tyrlaan has and change them up, similar with Joran, the Shadow Hunter.
Well, yeah, since he's a Nethermancer, just use the 4th edition.
Right, and, you know, like, look at the spells and maybe pick different spells or whatnot. But there's a lot of, like, custom stuff in here that doesn't really have necessarily a 4th edition equivalent.
Fair.
You know, it's not like the systems are dramatically different. That the step system is the step system, and, you know, numbers are numbers, and just kind of look at them, and if they seem a little bit off, then maybe tweak them so that they seem appropriate. But I personally wouldn't go hugely overboard in, I've got to make sure that this is a 4th edition stat block. Like, the ones that I would be most concerned with would be the talent selection that Joran has access to, and the talents and spells that Tyrlaan has. The rest of it is fairly simple otherwise. I mean, you've got Witherfangs, you've got Cadaver Men, you've got a couple of Tainted Windlings that aren't adepts, so you can kind of make their numbers be whatever you want them to be.
Yeah. Or just grab them, since those are all in the 4th edition books, just grab the 4th edition version of those. Well,
yeah, that's what I was saying. You could do that, but you might want to compare the stat blocks from 4th edition to the stat blocks here. Cadaver Men, for example, in 4th edition, their standard numbers are a little bit higher than they were in first. Slightly so that may be something that you'll want to keep an eye on just in terms of overall balance.
Yeah, but if you run a 5th, 6th, or 7th circle, that shouldn't be the major problem. All of these little tiny things shouldn't be the major problems. Dealing with Tyrlaan should be. Yeah. Because there's no actual horror you're going to face, just
the one thing that you would want to keep in mind is that the numbers of, like, opponents in here are kind of assuming that you are likely to be running with a larger group than most people typically run with these days.
Yes.
Most groups you're tending to look at like 4 or 5 as opposed to 7 or 8 player characters. And that can really mess with the action economy in terms of what they are able to handle for a larger fight. And you may want to keep that in mind in terms of
how many you're throwing at
how many you deal with. Like, instead of the 6 Cadaver Men, you might want to drop it to 4 or something like that. That's the kind of balancing you should almost always be doing when you're taking, like, a pre-written adventure. Comparing it to what your group size and capabilities are, and trying to balance around that, not necessarily to make it easy for them to win, but just to keep in mind that like, oh, this is something that is really going to cause a problem for them. Yeah. I should probably tweak it so that it is still an obstacle, but that it is not likely to end up in their deaths.
Yeah. It's not overwhelming and possibly death dealing. So one of those things. Had to ask. So just in case there was a 4th edition update.
If the group overall is intelligent and approaches things and like dealing with them in a more or less permanent fashion, the more loose ends they leave behind them, the tougher it's going to be to deal with the final location. Yeah. Because any cultists that don't get dealt with, especially the lieutenants at the first location, can be at the last one to complicate their infiltration of the lair.
So if the group is intelligent, have you met most gamers?
Hey, now I like to give them credit.
I'm teasing. Because that's not Earthdawn gamers. Earthdawn gamers are smart. They play Earthdawn. That's why that goes for everybody but ours.
So yeah, I really like this. I would probably, like, on a 5-star scale, I would probably give this like 4 stars.
Yeah, fair.
It's really solid. It's not perfect. I don't think it stands up quite as well, just in terms of my personal taste, to Infected or Blades. Mm-hmm. If I were going to be kind of like choosing. But of the published adventure books, I would actually put this above any of the collections like Thrall or Skypoint or Parleying Adventures, which have great adventures in them. Just overall, I like the larger, more sprawling type adventures than the little one-shot ones.
The ones that are slightly more epic in scale and scope and page count, which is fine. I got no problem with those. Because like I said, I like to spend a long time in the Earthdawn setting, so make this one last a while. You tell a better story that way. This is the novel framework that your player characters get to build their story on. And so when they're all done, take it and go write your novel. Just this is a wonderful framework to do that in. So any final thoughts, since I think we've
covered everything.
Cover to cover. So
this is good. Even if you don't necessarily use this exactly, if you are looking for some ideas of what kind of threats and what kind of situations when you start getting into the higher journeyman circles, this is the sort of thing that you may be running into.
Fair. And it's not a bad thing to steal from.
Nope.
As far as higher circle ideas, higher circle threats, and things like that. Because like I said, this is 5th to 7th. We hadn't covered an adventure of this magnitude before this. So this is a nice introduction to definitely a higher circle adventure to run. So folks, if you have any questions for us, please drop us a line at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. That email box is rather empty right now. So first come, first answered. You will get Josh's answers to all of your questions if you send them in. But we can't talk to you unless you send them in. So in the meantime, go curry favor from Icewing for your legend.
Good night, everybody.